Okay. Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is the creator, CEO, and founder of The Leadership Equation, no other than Miss Tia A. Williams.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm glad to be here.
Welcome back, Miss Tia, on Book 101 Review. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Sure. So my background actually is been in tech for about 30 years almost, and I've been everything from a technical manager to an instructor to an executive. I actually helped more than 10,000 people to either start or upgrade their careers in tech. And currently, I focus as a leadership strategist.
Our leadership strategies. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And today, let's talk about your upcoming book, Born a Statistic, Built to be a Leader. Tell us what is all about.
Yes, so the book actually, the title makes it almost sound like it's a memoir, but it's really not. The first two chapters are about my life, but it's the section is called "The Making of a Leader." It's the experiences and the things that actually made me a great leader. And I don't say that lightly, that I'm a great leader, but the things that I went through in life, when you look at those things and my career, the way my career accelerated, I've out of 10 jobs, different companies, I was promoted to leader in just about every one, and or had multiple promotions in them. And the last place that I worked, where the company was acquired twice within a year of each other. And I was promoted 5 times in 2 years, in essence, to become an executive, and led a team of 100 people through 100 people globally, actually, through you know fierce competition, and made them a single team. And it was a great experience for me, and that's essentially how my leadership equation was born.
Interesting, Miss Tia. And tell us, the title Born on Statistic is a proactive or provocative. What was the specific statistic you were born into, and what was the point did you decide you would defy that predetermined narrative?
Yeah, I was born to teenage parents. My parents were not old enough to drive when they had me, 30 days before my mother's 16th birthday. And my father told me about how he used to ride his bike actually to come and see me every day when I was a baby, because he wasn't old enough to drive. So that's where you figure, if you're born into a poor family, and the circumstances of being in a poor family, the expectations of the label that society puts on you is very limiting, right? The expectation is that you will live down to some poor expectation that has been set, and I've defied that my entire life. I very much have lived a life where I feel like my life has been bigger than the box that people have tried to put me in or keep me in, the labels that people have tried to give to me. One example that I gave in the book recently is I went to a networking event, and during the event, um, it ended up being that I actually, ended up talking to the group broadly, because some questions that they had, I was actually able to really answer and help. And the person leading the group actually said to me, "That is not at all what I expected when I saw you coming." Now, what she meant by that, it was she thought it was a compliment, but in some ways, it very much is undercover, or a microaggression, I guess is the way that I would say it, and that's the type of thing that have dealt with my entire life. Being one of the early women in tech, and being the only one in all male teams, and still succeeding, um, working on teams with all men, and they actually cringeworthily called me the alpha female. All of these things, really have been about me defying the expectations or the labels that people have put on me my entire life.
Beyond hard work, what is the core internal shift in identity from seeing yourself as a product of your circumstances to seeing yourself as a leader and had been happen first?
My first leadership role came when I was 17, and I was good at the job that I had, and for me, it's always been just work hard. My mother taught me to work hard. My husband taught me to work smart, and for me, it was always about just doing the best thing that I can do. I never set out to be a leader. I honestly, some people say the accidental leader. I actually don't like that phrase. I would say the reluctant leader, is probably a more accurate label for me. I often took leadership roles because I wanted to protect the culture. I wanted to protect the people, the team, and in doing so, I was able to excel. All right, and I had good mentors, that actually helped me along the way. I definitely don't want to make it seem like I did this all by myself, but that drive in me to not fail, the feeling of imposter syndrome, of always being afraid that somebody's going to, you know, quote unquote, see me for who I am. I'm someone who did not go to college, right? And that quite often has made me in my life feel like people see me as not worthy, to be the type of leader, in the roles that I was in, um, you know, and to be successful. So to anybody who's ever been like, maybe I'm not cut out for this, I'm someone who went from being a 17-year-old retail manager to eventually being a stay-at-home mom, to studying 2 books and getting certified and jumping into tech, to actually working in venture capital backed, tech SaaS companies and leading integrations for them. So if I can do all of those things in life, I feel like anybody, can succeed.
Can you share a pivotal moment where someone's low expectation based your background become the fuel you needed to push even harder?
Yeah, being the only woman in tech, was really one of the key, things for me. Quite often other men would be accepted, automatically, and for me, it always had to be about me proving that I was right. If I was giving advice on a problem, or we were all having a conversation about an issue, I always had to have proof. I had to, back up what I was saying with, documentation that proved that I was right. And over time, it always has, it's helped the others to accept me. Now, should I have had to do that? No, right? But you know, for the time that it was, that's exactly what I had to do, being the only woman, and constantly doing that fueled me, so that I became a much better engineer because I refused to give up. If there was a problem, I worked on that problem until I had the answer. And I think that basically put me in a position to think throughout my entire career that failure is not an option. I know people say that, and it feels a bit cliche, but I've never really thought about, you know, if I can't do this, I'm going to fail. It's always what's the next adaptation? Like, what's the next thing that I can do? Like, if this doesn't work, what's the next step that I can try? That's always been the thing that's driven me, and I think that's the thing that's made me as successful as I am.
Many people from humble beginnings talk about imposter syndrome. When they reach executive levels, how did you combat the voice and solidify your right to be in the room?
Yeah, Shirley Chisholm has a famous saying of, you know, if they won't give you the space at the table, bring a folding chair. And essentially, in some ways, that's exactly what I did. Is I made space for myself. You know, I had people who helped me. I had mentors. My mentor Terry Cox, I'll say his name as an example of someone who, even when I really didn't believe in myself or I felt unsure, he actually helped me to see, that I had the skills and I had, you know, the drive to actually be an executive leader. And it was much more about, here's the things that you need to learn that you haven't learned yet, so that it wasn't, a personal shortcoming on me. It was more so, here's just the skills that you need to know, which is very much why I approach teaching leadership as a craft and not as a personality trait.
Deconstructing the leadership equation, Misty, you argue that emotional intelligence alone is not enough. What are the other critical variables in your leadership equation, and why did you find EQ insufficient by itself?
Yeah, so EQ, one, you hear a lot of people talk about emotional intelligence, and it is the first step. You need emotional intelligence. I don't want it to seem like I'm saying that you don't. But we have to go beyond that, because if you look at the complexity and the way that things have changed, it's not just about being self-aware, it's about being able to take action on what you're aware of that awareness. So very much it's about, if you're working in complex environments, with cross-functional teams, the what we call the invisible leadership chart, about who do you need to influence to get things done. That's all relational intelligence. Then the other piece that you need is analytical intelligence. And analytical intelligence is really more so about, logic, and how do I look at this from a data driven perspective. Bringing those two skills together are what I call integrated intelligence, right? So it's not just saying, hey, I use my left brain and I use my right brain. It's I'm using my whole brain in order to actually lead. And something really powerful happens when you integrate your thinking as a leader. You start to be able to be what I call an and leader. You're no longer looking at either or, right? Either performance or people, results or well being. You become an and leader where it's performance and people, results and well-being, and that's a really key thing in the system, in the in my system, the leadership equation. And then the last part of it is systems, right? Because no matter how much you think, no how matter how well you think as a leader, you as a leader and what your teams do and experience are not the same, and your teams look at things in a very different way. And there's what I call the human variable. That human variable is what creates complexity, right? It's important that we look at the environment and the system that we are putting our leaders in, so that they're set up for success, and so that they can work with their teams in a way that makes them all high performing.
Miss Dia, let's make it practical. Walk us through a real world scenario where applying just EQ would have failed, but applying your full leadership equation led to success.
Yeah, just a very simple example. So I talk about a leader, we call him James, and James is a leader who is highly emotionally intelligent. He is very aware of his team's feelings. So he has teammates who are frustrated, right? And he understands their frustration because they're working with other teams and their work is being deprioritized. And they can't figure out how to, get the work that they need to get done. So they miss James's teams is missing their OKRs, right? Their objectives and key results. They're missing them because these other teams won't support them. And James understands this. He empathizes with this, but he doesn't take action on that. He doesn't know what to do to actually navigate that challenge and solve it cross functionally with these other leaders. And what ends up happening is the people on James's team start to leave, right? So the HR says, "Hey, James is highly emotionally intelligent. His his engagement scores are very high, but people on his team, he has high turnover because the people on his team are extremely frustrated that the problems that they're seeing are not they're not being resolved because James doesn't know how to take the action. He doesn't know how to enforce accountability in addition to being emotionally intelligent.
If EQ is the heart of leadership, Miss Tia, what is the mind and the spine of your system? What component provide the strategic direction and the fortitude to execute?
Yeah, that's the what we call analytical intelligence. So analytical intelligence is really your left brain, right? So if you think about um, you know emotional intelligence and relational intelligence, that's all your right brain. And essentially, what I try to do is help leaders who are highly analytical. People in tech, healthcare, manufacturing, essentially trades, right? They are typically highly analytical thinkers. They solve problems, right? They use data. But the thing that they lack quite often is they lack how to deal with emotions, with dealing with relational things on their teams. So what I do is I teach them to use those emotions as data inputs. So they're able to process what's going to happen based off of how someone's going to react emotionally. They're able to process that as data in a way that makes sense to them, so that they can make the right decisions based on people and the actual data itself. Because quite often, what tends to happen is highly analytical leaders tend to be successful in terms of the company saying, "Hey, they get the job done," but they leave a lot of collateral damage in their wake that quite often isn't acknowledged, right? And the way to solve that is by processing that emotional data, that emotional intelligence as data.
Interesting, Miss Tia. So, as a debut author, what are your short term and long term goals? As well as a CEO and founder.
Yeah, my short term goal is, the book is coming out, and I really want to share it with the world. There's a lot of people who are hurting, at all layers of leadership in their teams, and I feel like this book can help a lot. My long term goal is I plan to go on a speaking circuit and to really start to share with corporations, how they can actually implement the leadership equation in their organizations.
Good luck to your goals, Miss Tia, and looking forward for more success. What would be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be like you?
The first thing that I say is basically believe in yourself, right? Don't give up on you. Don't let imposter syndrome be the thing that stops you. So many of us deal with imposter syndrome, and um, if I can get over imposter syndrome and go from where I started to become an executive, and an executive working for companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars, anybody can do it. Right? So don't be too hard on yourself. You'll grow and you'll make mistakes along the way, but don't let it's about being able to act in spite of being afraid. And when I learned to swim after, you know, almost feeling like I was drowning as a child, eventually I learned to swim as an adult. The anxiety is still there, but now I can swim. So do it scared. It would be the advice that I would have.
Thank you for that advice, Miss Tia. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Yeah. So one book that really helped me, particularly when I was struggling with um, people who were high Q leaders, and how that was impacting their teams, in what I would say a drama way. The book No Ego, by Cy Wakeman, was extremely helpful for me, and I would recommend it for anybody who has teams and they're trying to figure out how to actually balance, accountability and performance, with emotional intelligence. And another book that I would recommend is Leading Change, by John P. Cotter.
Thank you for that recommended books, Miss Tia. Thank you, thank you. And how can a senior leaders use the principles in your book to identify and cultivate diamonds in the rough? Talent does not come from traditional pedigree.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest thing is when you're evaluating leaders, everybody's not meant to be a leader. There are two paths. And when you have people at that fork in the road, one of the easiest things to do is to actually just have a conversation with that person and find out, do they even want to be a leader? A lot of times people take on leadership roles just because they think that that's the next logical step for them, and unfortunately, quite often, that's how you lose top talent, is by pushing them into leadership roles that they never really wanted. So as a senior leader, I would say make sure from a career perspective that you understand if someone is even interested in leadership, and you start with smaller projects, right? You give people the opportunity to lead, with those guardrails that I was talking about, and gradually increase the responsibility, based off of their success.
If you had to distill your entire leadership equation down to one single non negotiable principle, what would it be, Miss Tia?
Lead with your whole brain. Yeah, that would be it. It would be lead with your whole brain, because quite often people tend to have a dominant side of their brain. They're either very analytical or they're highly emotionally intelligent. And people who are highly emotionally intelligent lead with their gut. People who are highly analytical lead with data, and you need both. So lead with your whole brain.
Well, thank you for that, Miss Tia. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 fourth season, and my baby podcast Law 101, and mental health 101, love letters in third season, and movie 101 review and music 101 fourth season, and science 101 and sex 101 in its second season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Tia, finally, your journey is the ultimate proof of concept. Looking back, what one piece of advice would you give to your younger self, the one who is just beginning to solve that leadership equation for the first time? Well, effective layer of leadership unlocked for an organizations.
Yeah, that's actually a bit of a tough question. But if I was looking back and talking to my younger self, the best thing that I would say is to know that you don't have to do it alone. You know that there are people there who will help you along the way, and you know trust yourself and trust in those relationships because ultimately those are the things that make you successful.
Indeed, Miss T.I. Williams. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, and hoping for more and more empowering books like this to come. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your upcoming book, your advocacy, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. The book again is called Born a Statistic, Built to Be a Leader, and it is due to release in November 2025. And my handle on LinkedIn is Tia A. Williams 2, the number 2. And my website is theleadershipequation.io.
Yes, people, let's support Miss T.I. Williams, because if you support her, for sure, more and more empowering leadership equation will rise, more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Miss Tia, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel, for having me.
More to come, people. See you soon.